Hi everybody, I'm Kristen, and today I am at Salmon Creek, right along the walkway here with Salmon Creek right behind me. And today I'm going to be talking about the life cycle of a salmon. So real quick, I want to kind of touch base as to why I'm talking about salmon. Salmon are actually a keystone species here in the Northwest. Does anybody know what a keystone species is? So a keystone species is a species that plays a very important role in the ecosystem and the environment. It's very critical to the other species around. Without a keystone species in an environment, it's very likely that the other populations wouldn't exist because of how important they are to this environment. So first I want to start off with the 5 species of salmon. Does anybody know what they are? So kind of the easy way that I remember is with my fingers. So I'm going to start off with my thumb. So the first species of salmon I'm going to state is the chum. So it's easy, it rhymes, pretty easy to remember, so we have the chum. The next one is a chinook, and you can make a hook with your pointer finger, kind of to remind you. The third one is a sockeye. So I don't really have a trick as far as remembering this one, since it's maybe the longest finger that can sock your eye. I know it's not very funny, but so the next one is going to be a coho for our 4th finger. Again, there isn't really a way to remember the saying for a coho for your ring. I guess coho for an O, ring finger, that kind of works. And lastly is pink, so your pinky finger for a pink salmon. Pretty easy to remember that one. So we have chum, sockeye, we have chum, chinook, sockeye, coho, and pink salmon. So it's important, we're here at Salmon Creek, and that's important because this creek, this stream, which is hopefully going to be a river one day, is expected to be home to a salmon run again one day. So biologists are expecting salmon to repopulate this area within the next 3 to 5 years, which is huge for our area, very important. It is currently home to steelhead, but there's no returning salmon population to the area. And is anybody familiar with the difference between a salmon and a steelhead? Right, so they are very similar as far as they go out into the ocean and then they return, but a steelhead is actually the ocean-going form of a trout. So they're 2 different species, 2 different kinds of fish, even though they exhibit the same kind of life cycle. So beginning with our life cycle of a salmon, we're going to start with where it all begins. So a salmon comes from an egg, and that egg is laid in a river, and we'll say our Salmon Creek, for example, is where it's going to start. So our eggs are down in the riverbed, and once they hatch, they become a fry into a smolt as they kind of go through their life cycle. Excuse me. And they grow up. They are in the river for about 6 months to a year, depending on their species and what size they need to be before going out into the ocean. And in this phase, they are a keystone species to the area because as an egg, they are a food source basically for other fish or for prey, depending on what eats salmon eggs. And then again, as the salmon gets bigger, it then makes its way to the ocean. It migrates to the ocean, where it stays there for 3 to 5 years, gaining in size, it's soaking in all the nutrients from the ocean. And at this phase, it's a keystone species because it controls the prey population. So while it's out in the ocean, it usually will feed on shrimp, it can feed on krill, sardines, herring, whatever is in the ocean at that time. And that also helps maintain those populations. So it's out there. Again, it's also a keystone species in this phase because that's where larger predators like sea lions tend to eat them. As the salmon then migrates its way back into the river, it's also a keystone species for those predators because such as bears will stand in the river as it's migrating its way, jumping through the river. Bears will then eat it, which is really good nourishment for them. Although it's important to save those salmon populations, to help those populations, it's a really good food source for bears. But if salmon have then made their way through all of these obstacles, as far as being eaten, being trapped by nets, being caught by fishermen, those are all hindering experiences that a salmon can go through to not fully make its way and complete its life cycle. But at the end of the day, if it makes it through and returns to its home, that is where the salmon is going to experience its spawning phase. So the spawning phase is very important because that's where it's allowed to release all of its nutrients. So once it's in this phase, it basically pours every single thing that it absorbed over the last 3 to 5 years into the river. The salmon has laid its eggs, it has done its job basically. Then the carcass itself will basically evaporate into the soil. So biologists, especially in heavier populated rivers, will collect those carcasses and spread them to other rivers because of how important they are for that ecosystem. So the carcasses, again, will just dump all of its nutrients into the river, and the riverbed will absorb it as well as the plants and the trees in the area. So the trees, it's very important for the trees because the roots will collect those nutrients, which help them absorb minerals to grow large. So it's very, very great as far as bringing it around, continuing to circle those minerals and spread them. Lastly, I want to touch on how important these fish are for our area. And it's very important to get involved. I know a lot of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife biologists like to have volunteers for collecting those carcasses. There's also volunteer opportunities to clean and restore habitats and riverbeds to make sure the streams are clean for the salmon to do their job. So again, it's a really great, and it's very important to understand what a keystone species is and to ensure that the salmon especially can do their job in a clean and safe habitat. So I just want to wrap it up. Is there any questions today? Oh, okay, thank you.